Academic Affairs at the School of General Studies. It is going to be my pleasure tonight to introduce Chris Morash, who will introduce Colm, Tóibín, and Kamila Shamsie. But if you'll bear with me for one moment, I want to just set a little bit of context around an event that I've been looking forward to for a very long time. So it's a pleasure for me to be here and to introduce our speakers and to talk to you about why we're together tonight. So I think the germ for this program grew out of the idea for a dual degree program between GS and Trinity College Dublin. We started talking about that, it seems like a very long time ago now. You will know how long ago if I say that it was just after the Brexit vote and during a US presidential campaign that I think can fairly be described as quite xenophobic. At that time, and I think continuing into the present, we at Columbia and Trinity have really felt the need to emphasize the value of international collaboration around education. I don't think I need to speak in defense of that tonight. I think tonight's event will be just one exemplar of how important it is for us, despite the activities of some of our governments, to get together, to collaborate, to have these conversations, and to share ideas. The dual degree program between Columbia and Trinity will admit its first students in the fall of 2018. A lot of work has gone into that. We are grateful for everyone who has participated. In association with that, an amazing relationship has sprung up between the Humanities Center at Trinity College Dublin, the Trinity Long Room Hub, directed by Jane Ohlmeyer, and the Columbia Heyman Center for the Humanities, directed by Eileen Galuli. So there is an amazing faculty collaboration component of this program, and that is sort of the beginning of tonight's event. In addition to thanking Eileen and Jane for their boundless energy and creativity, I also really want to thank Emily Bloom, who I'm so thrilled can join us tonight, and who really made this event happen and sparked it. There are a number of other co-sponsors who I will quickly thank before I introduce Chris Morash. They are the South Asia Institute, the Institute for Research on Women, Gender, and Sexuality, and of course the Society of Fellows and the Heyman Center for the Humanities. The conversation tonight, as you know, between Kamila Shamsie and Colm Tóibín will be moderated by the Vice Provost of Trinity College Dublin, Chris Morash, who is also the inaugural Seamus Heaney Professor of Irish Writing. And let me tell you just a little bit about him before I invite him to the podium. So Chris and I first met before he became Vice Provost. He was head of the School of English at Trinity, and we started to work on the English curriculum as part of the dual degree program I've mentioned. Just in the midst of our work, Chris was elevated, I think is the word that was used to me at the time, to the position of Vice Provost, and I think it was just totally representative of his character that he sort of apologized to me for the promotion, because he said, "I'm so sorry, someone else will take over, but I've got to go and like run this large world-class university." Excuse me. So it's worked out, I think, fairly well. Chris is the author of many books, as I'm sure you're aware, including the 2013 work, Mapping Irish Theatre, Theories of Space and Place, which he co-authored with Sean Richards, and which places Irish theatre in relation to modernism and shows how theatre functions as a machine for making space into place. We were discussing it today, wandering across the space of Columbia's campus. Chris's books also include the 2009 A History of the Media in Ireland, A History of Irish Theatre, 1601 to 2000, which won the Theatre Book Prize, and the 1995 Writing the Irish Famine. That's just the books he's authored. He is also the editor of at least half a dozen works, most recently including the 2016 Oxford Handbook of Modern Irish Theatre, which he co-edited with Nicholas Green. It's a collection of over 40 articles on Irish theatre from Wilde onwards. To give you just a little bit more of a sense of the range of his work, other edited collections include Shifting Scenes, Irish Theatre Going, 1955 to 1985, The Hungry Voice, Poetry of the Irish Famine, and Irish Theatre on Tour. Chris is currently working on a book about Yeats and theatre, while simultaneously providing leadership as the Chief Academic Officer of Trinity College Dublin, a daunting and impressive combination. I'm so delighted that he's able to join us today to moderate the conversation and to introduce our other speakers, and I ask you to join me to welcome him.
Thank you very much, Victoria, for that very generous introduction. I'm not sure how much is getting done on the Yeats book, I'll have to confess. It's a very real pleasure to introduce the two people with us this evening, the two novelists. Kamila Shamsie grew up in Karachi, currently lives in London, and I think that sort of bifurcated existence is very much central to the book that we're talking about this evening. She studied here in the US, University of Massachusetts in Amherst, where the poet Aga Shahid Ali was an important mentor. Her first novel, published in 1998, still a student, she wrote it in The City by the Sea. 6 more novels followed from that, among which I think we can single out Cartography, which was shortlisted for the John Llewellyn Rhys Prize. And what was probably her best-known work until Home Fire, Burnt Shadows, which was shortlisted for the Orange Prize and was winner of the Anisfield Wolf Book Award. An astonishing novel that manages to be somehow both epic and intimate, radiating out from that moment when the atomic bomb falls in Nagasaki and is moving around the world and into New York in the wake of 9/11. A God in Every Stone won the Bailey's Women's Fiction Prize in 2015, and the novel that we're exploring here this evening, I've got with it. Online in Ireland with a different cover, Colm something like this. Home Fire was longlisted for the 2017 Booker Prize. Dwight Garner, writing in the New York Times, wrote that it builds to one of the most memorable final scenes I've read in a novel this century. Truly remarkable piece of work. Colm Tóibín comes from the great nation of Wexford, currently teaches here in this parish. He first came to prominence in Ireland in the 1980s, a particularly fraught moment in Irish public life, as the editor of really essential public affairs magazine, McGill, and has ever since maintained that sort of journalist dedicated discipline and productivity, sort of alarming productivity. And in fact, there's a kind of parallel Colm Tóibín, parallel to the novelist and playwright, who regularly writes for the TLS, with New York Review of Books, London Review of Books, and has published 8 volumes of non-fiction, including what is, in my view, the best book that we have on Elizabeth Bishop. His first novel, The South, appeared in 1990, and there have been 2 collections of short stories and 8 more novels after it, including the one that we're looking at here this evening, House of Names. It's probably the 4th novel, Blackwater Lightship, 1999, that really cemented his reputation as a novelist first and foremost, and since then his career has followed 2 tracks. There have been what I call the classically Irish novels, Brooklyn, 2009, the long-gestated Nora Webster, 2014, that are rooted in a very distinctive Irish small-town life that's both secure and constraining. Then there have been novels that have followed a different track. The Master, which is a candidate for one of the 2 best Henry James novels by a Wexford man this century. And then there's The Tested of Mary, 2012. And of course, the novel we're looking at here this evening, House of Names. So it's with great pleasure that I welcome both Kamila and Colm for this conversation. I want to start with the origins of these books. Probably a good place to start, because we're looking at these books as both novels that have a relationship to Greek mythology. And I think Kamila, Home Fire, the great British director Jatinder Verma is really the origin of this for you. That he set you a challenge to write a play. Is that? Yeah.
It is. I had an email from Jatinder Verma, who runs a place called Dara Arts in London, which does Asian and British Asian theatre. And he asked me to come and have coffee with him and asked me to write a play. And I said, I don't know how to. And he said, well, adapt one. And he clearly knew what he wanted me to do. And he said, we're having a real sort of Greek moment thinking about it. Greeks are speaking to us these days. And something like Antigone in an Asian or British Asian context. And I have absolutely no memory of which one Antigone was. I have not looked at it since university. But I just nodded and said, well, I'll think about it. And went away and reacquainted myself with Antigone. And it was just one of those things that sometimes you're given a gift. and this felt like one because I very quickly saw the sort of contemporary story, not only that I could overlay, but I really, really wanted to overlay onto it. And pretended to myself that I was thinking of a play, but really all along thought, oh, here's my next novel.
Just maybe for the benefit of maybe a few people that haven't read it, would just give us a sense of the shape of the novel and how it works with the Antigone art.
So the novel is set, it's in 5 parts. It's, when I say contemporary, it's set in 2015, 2016. And there are 5 characters, and each part is from a different point of view. And in some cases, the names will tell you their corresponding characters, because there's Isma, who's as many, and then you can work out the rest. There's Aemon, Anika, Pervez, and Karamat. And it's 3 siblings, and the brother has gone off to join ISIS, leaving the 2 sisters behind in Britain to have different responses to this. And then you have the Home Secretary, which for those who don't know, in Britain is one of the highest offices, and you're in charge of matters such as terrorism and migration and citizenship. And so it's the first British Muslim Home Secretary and his son who becomes involved with the older sisters.
And I think when you were working on it, you initially started looking at various translations and versions of Antigone, but I think it was Anne Carson's marvellous, it's hard to describe it, I don't know if people know, the Canadian poet and translator Anne Carson has a version of Antigone called Antigonic, which is somewhere between a graphic novel and a kind of piece of art in its own right, with visuals and so on. It was Anne Carson's.
It was, but it wasn't Antigone, because she did Antigone and then she did an Antigone translation, which was later. That was the one I was looking at, and that I read several of the translations, and what struck me particularly in that one was it was while reading that the centrality of the relationship between the 2 sisters of Ismene and Antigone really sort of leapt out at me and became the starting point for how I would think about it, as being about these 2 sisters responding very differently to what is both a family crisis and a national crisis.
There's a great line in her translation, nothing vast enters the lives of mortals without women.
Yes.
And I mean, that's the novel in a nutshell in some ways.
It is, but it was a much, I was talking about this earlier to the students, it was a much different kind of line that was the one that struck me, which was when the 2 sisters have their different responses to how to respond to Creon's decree that their brother cannot be buried. And Antigone is, in that moment of anger with her sister and says, well, what do you care? What happens to me? You've made your decision, I've made mine. Our ways part. And it's essentially saying, what do you care if I die? As a result of what I do. And Ismene just says, I'll be so lonely. And I thought, there's an awful
Yeah. And was Anne Carson that triggered you as well? Was it Anne Carson's introduction to Iphigenia and Odyssey?
Yes, it's an introduction to her where she has really an amazingly dense set of sentences about the whole idea of violence and rage and anger. And I certainly had read that as soon as it came out. What was it called? That book of it's a translation of 3 texts, isn't it? Anne Carson. Anyway.
The reproduced trends.
Yes. What?
Is it Greek lessons?
Greek lessons. Yeah. Thank you. Greek lessons. And so it was that to Greek lessons, but it was exactly the same situation where coming up to I suppose 2 years before the centenary of the 1916 rebellion, people were wondering how the theatre could commemorate the rebellion, and so that and I get mixed up with whether it's the old Vic or the young Vic or the middle-aged Vic, but one of the Vics in London pulled it into a co-production with the Abbey and the Kennedy Centre, where they could do what they called an Irish Oristyle. And I remember on this campus and in some of the cafes around it, sitting with the Vic and with Fiona Shaw, who was just saying that the shape of those events do not fit the Oristyle, that you cannot connect them. You could perhaps make echoes or moments, but you couldn't actually write one using Irish characters. And we talked a lot about it, and there are many possibilities, all of which fell apart, I think. But of course, what I did was, and you were talking about this today, about something where I had never read Iphigenia in Alice. I keep wondering if it had a different title. Euripides, I thought it would have a jazzier title for it, like Electra. I would have immediately known it, but I didn't know it. And so just one night here, I read it, and of course that changed everything. That idea of something you don't know suddenly becoming much more interesting than everything you've known all along. So seeing the story from Clytemnestra's point of view gave me something that I wouldn't have got had I just tried to look at the Furies or Electra. That it gave me a sort of energy that I didn't get otherwise.
But this wasn't. But the book also, I suppose, picks up what we could call Orestes' lost years as well. That the place around that story don't really.
Yeah, that in other words, once I had written the opening section, I realised that where was Orestes when he was away? I consulted widely on this matter, and nobody, and the lovely answer coming back was, we don't know. And that was marvellous, because then you could start imagining where he might have gone and what you could do with him. And of course, even though this was not a contemporary novel, it's not set now, the minute I started to work on that section particularly, I could use Ireland in any way I wanted, because it was open for me to do so. So that when, for example, the whole idea of, there's a shadow in the book of Leda, and of Clytemnestra being the daughter of Leda. But of course, once the swan came in, I could use the story of the children of Lir. You know, I could throw in an Irish legend right beside the Greek legend, just because it fitted the shape of whatever I was doing. I didn't have to ask permission for that, which I think is why these texts are so interesting, because they're so open.
Sure. Yeah.
That even though they have, you know, a number of events occur, between those events, or the shape of the emotions that cause these events to occur, can be reimagined and be worked out.
Again, just for the benefit of people who may not have read it, we can quickly the outline of this. I mean, this is basically the telling of the story of.
Well, it's that
the rest is.
It's the Clytemnestra goes back over. I mean, she's rather pleased at the beginning of the book because she's just murdered her husband rather successfully, and she'd been planning this for a long time. Her idea was that when he had lured her and their daughter Iphigenia, to effectively, he said, to marry the warrior Achilles, but in fact to sacrifice Iphigenia, that she determined that if you ever come back victorious, I will kill you, and she planned that and worked that out. And but that in the meantime, in the middle of all this havoc of killing him, Orestes gets sent away, and Electra never gets included in the entire revenge plot. So she loses her daughter to sacrifice, her other daughter, who simply cannot understand how her sister is missing, her father's gone to war, and this mother of hers that she doesn't like has returned. And so two of the children almost go missing. One goes missing within the palace, you know, by her side was Electra, but Orestes physically goes missing. And of course they're waiting for Orestes to come back. And part of the problem of working with a contemporary novel form is that, I wasn't aware of another novel. There may be one, but I didn't know one in which a man or a youth or somebody of a certain age murders his own mother. And I had to make that psychologically convincing. I mean, Euripides said, "Oh, look, you can just do things off stage, you know, and have the Furies following him. In a contemporary novel, you can't really do that. You have to say, why? What was he like when he was 5 that he did that when he was 20? What was he like when he was 6? What occurred? What damage was done to this boy that allowed him, or opened up that space for him to become, without him becoming a psychopath, that he could do this?" Yeah. So that the form of the novel itself, I think is something that you were talking about, the form of the novel itself ends up taking over from the myth, that you have to fill in gaps in a way that's psychologically secure or psychologically convincing. to work with that.
And is that, I mean, is that one of the central challenges that, that when you think of, these plays as plays, they were performed with masks, so you were dealing with characters who had a sort of a fixed aspect, let's call it, and didn't have that sort of psychological exposition, that internality, and both of these novels are structured around individual characters and individual characters' points of view. Is that the device for dealing with that, the getting behind the mask?
It's what makes it possible to conceive of it as a novel to begin with, is to know that there are, those spaces that can be filled in. So with Antigone's stories, what was her relationship to her brother? That it became this all-consuming thing, and what was her sister's relationship to him? And why do these two sisters have such differing? That within the play you can sort of state it that they can almost be archetypes, and one is thinking of justice and one is thinking of obedience to the state.
Yeah.
But in a novel you can't. You have to see, again, it's that psychology. What is the relationship of the siblings to each other and to grief and grief of his brother?
But I mean, I think what happens in your book is that we can actually see the difference very sharply between the novel form and, say, a play, where that in the figure of Crayon, in the figure of the Home Secretary, that it could be managed to make him merely someone who has an edict and won't budge from his edict. But in a novel, what you do is you give him these astonishing ambiguities, that he is a poor, sport, suffering figure, that he's haunted, he has demons, and so that he's not merely somebody with ambitions, so that he became Home Secretary. He's not merely cruel. He's not merely someone who will do anything for power. He's some of those things at certain moments, but that he is a very complex individual indeed, which is something I think the novel form allows you to work with, where he can be in two minds in two different sentences, which I think an actor could maybe display, but it would be harder.
Yeah. And which also recognise something that's in the play, that in the production of Antigone is one that has to agree on its due. And if you don't, it becomes melodrama, it becomes villain. And in a sense, I mean, that is the real challenge in this novel, isn't it? That it's in some ways this character, the Home Secretary, who is in the background all the way through, and then at the end, it emerges with a kind of humanity, in spite of the fact that he is in some ways the villain of the piece, but that's too simplistic.
Yeah, and I think, I think that's what you have to do, because they're all killing some member of their family.
Yes, yeah.
I mean, Electra doesn't directly, but she's very much behind it, and you have to, if you say, well, here's this book, and everyone basically is killing some member of their family, really, because usually you think it would build up to one person killing, and to have that many, and yet have it work within. I mean, I think that's something that struck me as so extraordinary, that it's still. It's not here's huge melodrama where we go from it, but how we each death leads to the next one, and that sense of they are now caught in this bind, and psychologically there's nothing else they can do. Of course, there was something else they can do.
You said, Colm, at one point, also came into this as well. That's that sense of one.
I mean, the thing is, I think you work like a magpie in the sense that if anything occurs to you, see if it will work. So here is a young man whose father has been murdered, whose mother has taken a lover, who's wandering aimlessly in a palace. And I think I can find things for him to do. And he's not even going to put an anti-disposition on, but he is going to become even more paranoid and capable of mood swings and feeling left out of everything. So that certainly you can, I think you can absolutely see that, as indeed I think you can see, we saw The Winter's Tale the other night, there are elements of The Winter's Tale in the Antigone story, of the sort of king who just briefly loses it enough, and you watch his rage, or you watch his inability to bend, or his inability to see reason, against another force, and that, you know, that's also being worked out.
It's a question of atmosphere as well. I mean, that sense of palace at night, and the emptiness of the palace, and the emptiness of these corridors, and people constantly listening to one another behind the corridors. You know, apart from the ghosts, like all that.
Yeah, I mean, there was a moment where I have to get Orestes locked up. You know, he has to be kept somewhere, and it isn't exact, but I did meet somebody from boarding school in Ireland, Catholic, nice boarding school that I went to, and said to me, "So you finally put our school in a book." You know, in other words, but that idea of all these boys locked in together with this dormitory at night, and bunk beds, and sort of figures of authority and fear and bad food, and I had no trouble with that in the sense that I was that soldier, you know.
Yeah. I mean, for both of you, though, there's a political context to the work. I mean, you mentioned that you're writing this during commemoration of the 1916 Rising. It's much more upfront with yours. I mean, and you've added a phrase to the language, Googling while Muslim. I mean, there's a great scene where there's a character is told to, you know, if you want to find out where this IRA bomb was set off in a particular place in London, Google bomb in this road. This is what I'll be caught for Googling while Muslim. You know, but that sense of, again, it's a sense of being watched, of a certain state surveillance pervades the book. Is it much the origin of the book in some ways as well, was it?
I don't know if it was the origin of the book, but it was certainly as I was writing the book, you know, I was aware of Googling while Muslim.
Yes, yeah.
You know, so it was, you know, once I knew that I was going to have this character who goes and joins ISIS, and I thought, well, I need to know more about that.
Yes.
Right. and it was a very, you know, because I grew up in Pakistan in a military dictatorship, where on the phone you would just assume the phones were tapped. And so there are certain kinds of things no one would say. And you would be sort of speaking in code, or you wouldn't say it, or you would wait till you saw someone in person. And to be in Britain into 2014 and feel that same sense that I've gone, you know, I have to find a way around this. And I found that I was doing things like building up a defense in my mind. You know, I'm a novelist. I have a published record as a novelist. I'm going to tell a few key people what I'm working on so they can back me up. And then I find myself thinking things like, but I've been on Radio 4. And half my brain was saying this is absurd, and the other half of my brain was doing this. And when I started, I'd do things like, you know, I'd go on Google and look up things related to ISIS, and then I'd go and look at some celebrity websites for a while.
Give yourself an alibi.
To give myself an alibi. And it was a sort of, you know, this peculiar thing. And one of the great sources for the novel was the writer, novelist, playwright Gillian Slover was working on a play about young Britons going to Islamic State. And she was a good friend and was very generous and shared things with me. And one of the most striking things was that she had gone to interview some young British Muslim students who were about 16 years old, 15 or 16. And she said to them, so what do you know about ISIS? And what do you read? And what do you think? And they just, you know, they said, we don't. We don't look at anything. If we see a newspaper lying somewhere on a train that has a story, we will not pick it up. We don't want anyone to see us looking at that and wondering why we're interested. And that became, you know, again, this the whole way in which you're so aware of being the suspect citizen, sort of playing its way. And it was very useful to have that because then I could bring it into the novel.
And that's their formula in the novel, I suppose, as well. As we get to the end, when we have the Twitter feeds, the newspaper reports, and so on, that's something that is deeply internal, deeply personal for these characters. Something is out there in the public domain and is distorted.
Well, it is the idea of the story you hear, you know, in the public domain, and what relation does it actually bear to the private lives of these people.
And there's the question then of your own visa status.
When I moved to Britain in 2007, and I became a citizen in 2013, and it was a fairly difficult process, and there was, I mean, not difficult compared to people for whom it's really difficult. I'm very clear with that. But rather than difficult, I'd say, it was a very uncertain process, and I was in a state of insecurity through much of it, because the visa I entered in on was disappeared, it was eradicated, and I thought I'd have to leave the country and blah, blah, blah. So I was in a constant state of, they've changed the visa laws at any moment and I have to leave. And then I became a citizen. And I thought, right, now I'm safe. I can stay here, it's all right. And then weeks later, I was reading something and discovered that if you're a dual citizen, as I am in Pakistan and Britain, then the British government has the right to strip you of your British citizenship if you're seen as, and it's at the discretion of the Home Secretary, the single individual or department can decide this. But it was a law that was very rarely used, except when young Britain started going to join ISIS. Theresa May, who's now the Prime Minister and then was the Home Secretary, started to just really want to use this as much as possible and wanted to expand the laws to make it easier and easier to strip people of their citizenship.
And there was quite a nice campaign at the time you were writing as well, wasn't there? There were trucks going around the country with these sort of billboards on them.
Yeah, go home, so to say. I mean, it is stated government policy to create a deliberately hostile environment for migrants. But this was about citizens, and people's citizens she wanted to. And so I was very aware also while writing it of there's this two-tiered citizenship of those whose citizenship is assured and it's there and absolute, and those include migrants, the children of migrants and the grandchildren of migrants, for whom it's something that can be taken away at the discretion of the state.
And do you see the novel as really as a kind of intervention in that sort of debate? I mean, is there? I mean, there's obviously a politics to it, but I mean, how to what extent did you see that as really making a political intervention?
I always think there's politics in novel, and I always think that novels are part of a political, or can be part of a political conversation. And it's part of my interest as a novelist, is to see the way, and it's why Antigone is such a gift, because it is, and so much of Greek tragedy, because it is the familial and the intimate, and then it's the state and it's the politics. And both those things are there so clearly in Antigone, and they've always been what I've been interested in, the way you can be living. I'm always I remember when I came to America as a student at 18, and one of the things that struck me was people's certainty here that you could control your destiny, that you were in charge of your life, you could decide, you could, you grew up in Pakistan, and you just know that, it is so.
Yes, exactly. And Antigone lends itself to that so well. I mean, one of the things when I was thinking about this, I started counting the number of Irish Antigones, and particularly during the 1980s, when the conflict in Northern Ireland was at its peak. There was Tom Holland's The Riot Act, 1985, Brendan Kennelly did a big version in 1986. Colm Morrison, Irish director, did a version set in the Middle East in 2004. There's Seamus Heaney's Burial at Thebes that you used at the beginning of your novel. And there's No One Like Cafferty one, this version as well from 2008. Again, a kind of post-Good Friday version. So, it's been very pertinent to your
in October 1968, the first big civil rights march in Northern Ireland was 5th of October. But I think the 27th of October, meaning it had to be written a week earlier. There's an essay by Conor Cruz O'Brien, who was a important intellectual in Ireland, a politician, appeared in The Listener, called Antigone in Ireland, and just pointing out to people what Antigone had lost by wanting to do the single act of what he called civil disobedience, which was that she had lost her own life, Haman's life had been lost, Eurydice's life, just a number of lost lives for a single act of what he would have called foolhardiness. But this then appears in a book called States of Ireland, published in 1972, where there's a footnote, just a little, or an asterisk rather, just saying, at the time I wrote this, there had been no killings. At the time I published this, there has been 1,572 killings. But in other words, but he invoked Antigone, and in the class that I've been teaching with Lisa Dwan, And Lisa and myself have been working on another version of the story, which will be performed here for the first time on the 22nd of April. So just in case you think Antigone's gone out of Ireland, on our way back into Ireland. But then we've been looking at all of the versions, you know, with Karina in the class as well, and Professor Foley came to talk to us too. But the idea that, for example, in Paris in 1944, by Henri, by Brecht in Switzerland in 1948. And, you know, in other words, that famous speech that mattered so much for German philosophers, you know, that of all the wonders, nothing more wondrous than man. And in 1944, you cannot say that. It's unsayable. In 1948, of course, it's of all the wonders, nothing more monstrous than man. That, in other words, Antigone fits in her moment each time. And what I think Lisa and myself have been working with is the idea that at the moment here, of course, I mean, we're living in a time, you know, in a post-Weinstein America, in Me Too, but also the events that have been happening in Ireland in relation to, for example, Waking Feminists. You know, that text can be married or matched to current events in many, many ways. And I think, as Professor Foley has shown in her book, it's the most performed play in the world.
Yeah.
And in your book, you've shown that every country where there's a crisis, suddenly you can make your own, you can reshape Antigone for your own version, which is why when we studied your book in the class, just because it's a fully contemporary London novel, you know, it's a city novel.
Well, one of the things that struck me, and you know, by no means was mine looking back at any other versions, you know, definitive, but I think it's interesting that from what I could gather, the 20th century Antigone is sort of this figure of civil disobedience within these, whether it's apartheid South Africa. I love the story of Nelson Mandela and other ANC people doing it in Robben Island with Mandela playing crayon, and then after saying that, of course, we were all Antigone. And then, of course, in South America, where you have it in that Antigone in the 20th century seems to me, and you're going to tell me I'm very wrong, but the ones I was aware of were set in sort of dictatorships of sorts, that she was the figure again. And what struck me about both Seamus Heaney and Garson is Seamus Heaney, you know, there's one line in there which is almost directly George Bush's line of "You're either with us, you're against us."
Yeah.
And Garson, in her introduction, talks about Guantanamo a lot. And I thought, you know, isn't it interesting that you can see a 21st Antigone in a world of war on terror who is within the democratic state gone wrong. The democratic state that has come to believe that old lie, that there is a trade-off between civil liberties and security. So it's, and of course also realize I'm seeing that because that's what I, you know, is my primary political interest.
And at the same time, I think there's this reversal of power takes place by sort of fully embracing a kind of objection. Antigone basically reverses the sort of power flow. So at the end, it's Creon who's brought down in a sense. So I think you know the conflicts are really in terms of the Me Too.
Yes, it would be very difficult now to write a heroic Creon, or a Creon who gets away with it.
That's right.
I just think if you run down Broadway, I think we can try to produce one.
That's right.
So we really must try.
The Zizek version as well, where he tried to be the...
Oh yeah, but the Zizek version manages, and this is the Zizek version where he has three different endings. But when you read it, you realise that one, you know, he thought of everything. He didn't think of the feminist perspective. His Antigone never really gets to speak properly. Everybody else does. So that, you know, everyone's agenda is both on the table, but there are also parts of an agenda missing each time. So that it's just open to interpretation in all those ways.
Is one of the challenges in dealing with Greek mythology as a basis for contemporary writing the problem of the gods? I think there's a line here. You know, Electra says, "We live in a strange time, a time when the gods are fading. Some of us still see them, but there are times when we don't. Their power is waning."
Look, I'll steal from anyone. If anyone tells me anything, don't tell me anything ever, because I just take out Wotan. You know, in other words, I'm working with the Ring now. I'm entirely with Wagner at this moment, when living in a time when the gods, so that it's that moment when when he goes to see Erda, and she comes up from the earth and says to him, "It's over. Do you not know? Do you not realise what's happening?" And he doesn't. And we had this wonderful exchange between them. She's a sort of mezzo soprano or contralto, and it's a very powerful moment where you watch him greatly reduced by not knowing this, not seeing it, and her very grand, buried in the earth, knowing it. And so I just took that straight away from Wagner, thank you, and that idea, and I took it for strategic reasons, because it's very, very difficult. And I think this is something, I really want to hear you about this, because the novel remains, whether we like it or not, a secular space. That it's very, very difficult. I mean, Mr. Darcy does not pray for a nice wife or a new horse. Lady Catherine de Bourgh does not displease the gods. Isabel Archer just, does not. The novel is filled with human desires, human wishes, destiny, choice, chance. But you don't, the other business, the business up there is left out. So that, so it is fascinating here to watch, however, your version of Antigone praying, your version of Antigone not being an entirely secular figure in an apartment that seems fully secularized space in the way Eamon even has furnished it, or the way the neighbors are. I just wonder how how much you worried about that, or how you pull that off, really.
Well, I mean, it's interesting, because when I was thinking about what I was doing, one of the thoughts, I thought originally that the Antigone figure, Anika, because they're Muslims and they're to varying degrees practicing Muslims, the two sisters, and I had thought that actually she might bring God into it more, into her grief and into her opposition to the state, and that it might be about religious law versus, and when it came to it, it wasn't there. It just wasn't in her. And actually her sister is the one who is the deep believer. But it's, it's not that the gods are ever going to descend. Yeah. So it can be that she prays and that there is solace in that. But that's as far as it's going to go. The role of religion will be that you see that as a source of solace for her, but it's not going to be an active, so their Muslimness will be an active element, but not in a religious way, in a political way. And I was struck by the fact that when I came to writing Anika, the religious stuff really fell away for her in a way that I thought, it's just not. Somehow my brain was saying, don't make her invoke God and justice of God and the laws of God. That's just not.
Yes, I remember that Virginia Woolf loved the idea that T.S. Eliot prayed, and herself and Vanessa were always trying to get him to tell them what he said when he prayed. He would fall around laughing, he would burst with laughing, and Tom Eliot on his knees in a state of prayer. How did Tom address the Lord? And she thought it was desperately funny.
But I suppose the narrative that you're working with, it pushes it in a certain direction, because there are various versions of particularly religions with God's descent, and that's how you resolve the problem. So you have to find other ways of resolving the narrative if you extract the gods from it.
Yes, I think you should take enormous liberties, and if I was a scholar, I would put an interdict on this. I would just say all these non-scholars will stop writing novels on this subject. It's very kind of you even to be here. But you do then have to take enormous liberties. So I have to punish Orestes. I have to have him pursued by the Furies in some way or other, because he's killed his mother. So you just go for a long walk and you think, how will that happen now? It will happen first of all silently. That it is that nobody wants him. Once he's killed his mother, they realize, and it's in the book, the line, they realize he was someone who would do anything. His sister doesn't want him, his friend doesn't want him. He's not wanted in a room. He's left out of things. So that you bring it down to some space that you can deal with in a chapter. You can give him this loneliness, this fear that none of them will ever want. And that's, I think, as much as you can get if you're trying to connect the Furies to a modern novel or a contemporary novel, and then just bring it down to its very opposite. You bring the noise down to silence, and you bring the trial and all those matters down to a few words that were almost said, but that nobody really was ready to speak. So that's how you work that. It's almost as though if you were trying to do a version of a Renaissance painting and you had the angel's wings, maybe just one line might be enough to suggest somehow or other the wings, but you couldn't do the wings in full conviction now. As a painter, it would be very hard to, I mean, I know Angels in America tries this, but to do a full enunciation as a painter, you would find that you would be reduced to a bit of pink and some lines and a lot of emptiness.
Is that partly also the situation being, this was an Irish novelist in 2018, having lived through a period when Ireland went from being a culture that was very religious, very deeply religious, and has become deeply secular?
I mean, that's in one of the early pages of the book where my mother and her sisters believed that when somebody was dying, and the banshee, a knock would come to the door in the night out of the blue, and then they would know. That stopped. I mean, that didn't continue beyond, I keep thinking it didn't continue beyond the Beatles' first LP, or the arrival at the supermarket, or yogurt, or there was some object came into Ireland. Gay Byrne, there's some object came into Ireland, and once that object came in, that was the end of that. But you see, it would have continued in the countryside, but not in the town. It would have continued in the town longer than in the city. So that you watched it. In my life, I'm 62, and that would have been something in my life has slowly faded in Ireland. So that you'd find it hard to find someone now who would have heard that knock and be fully sure that it was there. So yeah, that idea of I didn't just take it from Wagner, I took it from Ireland, that the idea of just watching the slow decline in, even in certain sorts of religious practice, such as going to confession on a Saturday, or all of those businesses that you're brought up with, suddenly realizing no one believes any of that at all. When did that start? And so that it just became one of the strategies I could use in the book, so that the characters would have agency, so that things they would do might not prevail if they were not lucky. That idea of coincidence and chance would have to matter in the book.
Yeah. But the residue of that is there to be used.
Yeah, the residue of that is also, of course, language. That's what Clytemnestra calls the leftover language of prayer, which of course has an enormous resonance and won't go, which is almost what we're working with in the novel, that a sentence, and even the sentences you quoted from Anne Carson say, can have a resonance still that lifts it above the language merely of, for example, information, or the banal business of speech, that's heightened speech.
Whereas in Home Fires, it's almost like there's no opposite really, isn't it? That we have a character like the Home Secretary who is very much kind of secularizing, very much, and the thing that catches him is something that has perhaps a religious force at its core, even though you're saying you're deliberately trying to pull that back, but it is something like religious force.
Well, it is religion as political identity.
Yes, okay.
Because
yes.
It was one of the striking things when I was researching this, and I was looking at sort of studies of the young men and women who go to join ISIS, and the intelligence agency MI6 had done a report and said basically, which is a gift to a novelist, there is no type. They're all types. Some are younger, some are older, some are married, some had children, some are middle class, some are working. But they said if there is one factor that is more consistent than any other, it is that they did not grow up with religion as a significant factor in their lives. Which made sense to me because the ISIS's version of Islam is so extreme that even if you grew up in what you would otherwise recognize as sort of a very conservative, even extremist version, and that is the Islam you know, you would look at ISIS and say, no. So in some ways there has to be some other searching going on and some way in which your political identity as a Muslim is waiting for something. And then someone comes along and says, this is Islam. And you don't have, all this backing to say, no, that I don't recognize that. And so I was sort of,
Yeah, and I think you have a character of a political commentator on Pakistani television who comes in and what basically says this.
Yes, and so I was interested that of the three siblings, Pervez is actually the one who is the least religious of the three. I mean, his sisters, and particularly his elder sister, is much more interested in her religion. But so I wanted to also separate those things of religion as a political identity and religion as sort of this sort of faith thing. And so it was important to me to be able to find a way where you could have a character who is a devout Muslim and is a believer, and you do see her praying, and not have her come across to an audience who may be from the secular world as someone who's just sort of ridiculous and silly and believes in the tooth fairy sort of thing. But it is also interesting to hear you talk about that moment when certain beliefs went, because in Pakistan that moment hasn't arrived, and there's a friend of mine who's a psychoanalyst in Karachi, and he said, well, of course, one of the interesting things, because he studied in North America, and he said, but what do you do when you live in a world where possession is a real thing, where jinns, genies, are real? The Quran says that there are angels and there are humans and there are jinns, and the entire culture will tell you that, and so someone comes and someone is having issues, and at some point they mention that, by the way, there's also this jinn that is, haunting them or is possessing them, and you can't convince them that it's some kind of psychological, because the world they're in says jinns are real and possession is real. And so how do you then enter that space, and what do you do with it? And it did strike me that it would be an interesting thing for a novelist to write this, bearing in mind that your readers, some of them will believe in jinns and some of them will not. And you have to write for both audiences. And I think one of the things that I want to do with a novel is to write for the audience who is a believer and the audience who's not a believer, and try and make the characters work and be sympathetic and antagonistic to both these kind of audiences.
That sense, let's call it betweenness, and being between a world where there are gods and where there's something else and beyond that. There's a certain sense of homelessness, if you like, in both novels. That both novels, Home Fire, Ghosts and Names, that they're both about, in some ways, abandoned houses. I mean, House of Names are pretty two abandoned houses, the palace and the house of the old woman, which is the House of Names, where Wesley spends his time. And here, we literally have a house that is abandoned. The family house is abandoned. Are these myths, particularly the Antigone myth, is it something about a certain kind of homelessness in the contemporary world? I think, particularly thinking of these as transnational novels, do we live a kind of homelessness, and is that one of the essential things that's being picked up here? Does that make sense? That's a question.
Yes, we have to think about the answer.
It's hard to talk about transnational. In other words, it doesn't occur to Clytemnestra for a second where she belongs or doesn't, or to Electra. But Orestes is the one who's been away. Now, once you start that in a novel, because we have, you can look at plays and think, oh, this is a homecoming. I mean, we were looking in the class the other day at Brian Friel's translations and think, oh, Owen comes home in the homecoming. In Brian Friel's Faith Healer, of course, the ending will be that they will go back to Donegal, where he's somehow from. And that idea of going home or being away from home. But what I could do with the arrest stage was that I could take him into a state of deep loneliness and alienation from everything. Give him a sort of haven rather than a home. That he would always remember as being a peaceful place where everything had been very easy, fully protected in some way or other. So that later on in the book, when they would go home, home would seem like the last or the least safe place you could possibly be. And indeed, he is now a lethal weapon himself in that place. So that you are playing with that idea, that somehow or other his mother thinks he's home without knowing. Clytemnestra thinks that this lethal weapon of a son of hers has come home without realizing that this home for him is a poisonous place or a poisoned place where he has been was haven. And so that you can dramatize that and work with it as two things going against each other. I thought in home for it, kind of that the whole sense of a London fully and easily inhabited by these characters, without them constantly saying, well, I'm actually not really from here, and I may be going home soon. And it's called Home Fire, you know, but that's very much in the book as a sort of as a new way of seeing London. That Norman Tebbit he was a pretty objectionable member of Margaret Thatcher's cabinet, and he said that on your bike, to people who don't know, would work. But he also said that this business of Pakistanis cheering for the cricket team, when they were getting all the benefits of an English education and health system, had to stop. And, but I did feel that those issues don't arise here the same way, unless they do in the Home Secretary's own particular sort of makeup.
Well, it's interesting. I'm a great cricket fan, so the Norman Tebbit line has always been, and it was, there's this thing called the Tebbit test, which is if you are a migrant or the child of a migrant from Pakistan to Britain, the Tebbit test, which cricket team do you back? I, of course, will always back the Pakistan cricket team, and, why would you not? But also, I didn't move to Britain until I was 34, but there are British Pakistanis who were born in Britain and grew up in Britain. And the thing that Tebbit didn't realize, because today you will find more British Pakistanis cheering for the English team than you did in his time. The thing Tebbit didn't work out was the reason that's happened is now the England cricket team has Pakistani, Indian, Asian, Muslim players in it. And they see themselves reflected, and that was the thing Tebbit didn't work out. He thought that the migrants had to change. The cricket team had to change. And so I'm sort of, I see the London that I'm setting in one in which the cricket team has changed. And it's part of what makes the Home Secretary, actually it's part of, what I find interesting is that he also thinks, look, London's changed, you can belong, you can be here, why are you still resisting? Why are you still going away from it? But they don't doubt, they never feel, for whatever their angst and anxiety is, it's never, I'm not a Londoner. It is, we are Londoners, but then there's this fraught relationship you have to all kinds of different policies and things that are going on. But they are all firmly, all five characters are absolutely Londoners in different kinds of Londoners. And I did want that to be there, that sense of being Londoners. And of course, part of what makes London London, the way that part of what makes New York New York, is that to be a Londoner and to be a migrant, they sit very easily together, these two things. And that is, rather than transnational, it's a cosmopolitan city, which allows the two-ness and the twain-ness quite easily until that moment when it doesn't.
And you could say Antigone becomes the emblematic figure of that, the figure who puts herself outside the city walls, and yet is very much part of it. Thank you very much. This has been fascinating. We can have applause for her. We'll perhaps open it up for a few questions. If anybody has anything they want to ask. Covered a territory. Please, yeah.
I was thinking about when you start to take a novel out of a story that is also a drama. And it seemed to me that you take the relationships so much. And you're very open, you see, the relationship you are working on is maybe going to take the extraordinary, like this person there. Whereas you went for the isolation, the gap, the absence in the story. And that was the most powerful sort of isolation. It's an isolation which is there throughout the Aristotle. You made it, I think, just flowered out of it. Can you say, both of you, a bit more about how, faced with a story, it is also a drama, a very sort of subtle drama, where you go in order to make it your novel? Or maybe that's too complicated.
I mean, for me, where I went first was to go down to the most intimate details of, who are these siblings, how did they grow up, and then to move from there. But actually, I think it's interesting because I think isolation also became, because part of what I think happens in Home Fire is the siblings who grow up completely entwined, and then for one reason or another, whether it's with one moving away or one going to university, that isolation develops between them. And it's about the not knowing how to deal with that changed family dynamic, or what can make relationships that close then become isolated, and how does that separation set in? So I was thinking about it, but I was thinking primarily, to start with, I knew I had to start very, very, in the rooms of the houses before I could move out to the state. And that sense of, so what are the relationships here? How do they grow up? How do they, who is grieving? Also, why are they grieving? I think that was the question. The central question which I started is, why are these two sisters grieving differently? I suppose that was where I started and went from there.
And that sense of isolation, you find really rich for that in the Skype calls. With a brother make a Skype call and cut it off. So it's just the connection made. There's no communication.
I have a question about, I was thinking about what you said about things that the novel does well, as opposed to things that are endemic to the Greeks. And one thing that I think the novel does well, and that certainly happens in both of your novels, is stories of people falling in love, romantic love. I mean, to me, it was so compelling to see the two sisters both falling in love with the same person very differently. And then, for me, in reading House of Names, almost as I was saying this to Krista, that almost the emotional heart of the novel is watching Orestes, I think, fall in love with Leander. And the love between them is like, it's such a... Anyway, to me, this was like a thing about the novel, and that is not so much what I associate with the Greeks. And I wonder how you felt about having these love stories come into your works, and how that works with or against the Greek stories.
Well, I think we're back with the idea of the novel wanting this, being hungry for certain things. It loves inheritance. It loves people being on their own, having been in a crowd. And then it loves this idea that if someone's with somebody, they will start feeling something for them, which they won't understand, and will want more from the person than they will get. And we, the reader, will wonder, oh my Lord, how is this going to go? So that once I can get Orestes with his friend Leander, I start with sort of dependency. But then that dependency becomes something much, much larger and greater for him. And you realise that haven that I mentioned has been a place where he knew some sort of harmony without knowing a name for it, or anybody else noticing or saying anything about it. And that's what he found there. So that central part is you're absolutely right, a love story. As indeed, at the very centre of Home Fires is this idea that Aemon does literally, that they do actually fall, I mean, it begins in another way, but they do actually fall in love.
And that's that same thing that the novel just wanted it. The novel had to have it. You have the play in which there is, he's the son of Creon, but he is also the fiancé of Antigone. And there's no way that can't then be central in the novel. There's no way that the story of both the father-son, but also of the two lovers, it has to play into it.
I just wanted to ask, now that we heard earlier about Kamila Shamsie's personal experience with her visa and the British government, I just was curious, now that you were on the panel, Colm, living in America, you think has had a kind of similar personal impact on your writing, or anything about Transnational?
Oh, I mean, I'd love to feel that it hasn't had the slightest effect on me at all. That in other words, it's very, very difficult, if you're not American, to write an American character after a certain year. I don't know what you call things, and I don't understand how religion works, and I don't understand how race works. I wouldn't know whether it was called an automobile, or people just say that sometimes, or how all that works. You know, I wouldn't understand what being from Texas means. I keep asking people, because I'm working at television, what does being from Cincinnati mean? So I look at you. And so that American puzzles me. But it's lovely sometimes. It used to happen at the beginning when I started to teach here that it's almost like Jared Manley Hopkins when he arrived in Dublin and was living there. He wrote what we were called the terrible sonnets, the very dark sonnets. But every year, I would teach for a semester in various places. This is for the last 10 years. And every year I would come home with a really dark short story. And I shouldn't publish them all together. And they're often about family or home or missing home or being away from home. But I should put them all together and just call them the American story. But I mean, part of the opening of House of Names is that I was subletting an apartment where I couldn't sleep. And there's no greater gift to a writer, because you get up at 3, you just got to get up at 3 in the morning, and nobody knew that. I mean, there was no one to prove that I wasn't Clytemnestra. You know, I mean, there was nobody from home. There was nobody else there. I was there on my own, and I was you know, nothing to complain about except I couldn't sleep. And so I started to write it under those conditions, which I probably would not have got had I been at home with everyone I know and love, had I been in an absolute secure space with all my books, and I'm at the age where home is where your CDs are. You know, where all my CDs are. I would probably not have thought of writing in the voice of Clytemnestra.
Anybody else have? Okay. Will we leave it at that? Yes. Yeah. Okay, well listen again, but thank you very much. Oh yes, and there are copies of books over here, which are, you know, they make attractive gifts if you already have a copy. So.